Hello, everyone. Now, I know that it's hard to keep up on top of what's going on in the Holy Land, but if you want to know more about what's happening here in Israel, I'm Aaron Porras, and this is the Weekly Review. You thought we were under lockdown before? Well, just wait. We're just a week into nationwide closures in Israel, but infection rates are still skyrocketing. The Jewish state now comfortably claiming one of the worst infection rates per capita in the world. Israeli ministers then are now announcing an even more severe response to the coronavirus pandemic.
אנחנו נמצאים ברגע האמת. הגל השני של הקורונה מכה בכל העולם ומכה גם בנו. התחלואה בישראל עולה, מספר החולים הקשים עולה, לצערי גם מספר המתים. ביומיים האחרונים אנחנו שמענו מהמומחים שאם לא ננקוט צעדים מיידיים וקשים, אנחנו נגיע אל פי התהום. כדי להציל את החיים של אזרחי ישראל, נדרש מאיתנו עכשיו להטיל סגר מלא למשך שבועיים, מיום שישי הקרוב ועד מוצאי שמחת תורה. אחר כך נמשיך בשבועיים נוספים של סגר, אני מקווה עם פחות הגבלות, אבל אני אומר מראש, זה תלוי בנתוני התחלואה. ככל שהמצב יאפשר, אנחנו נחזור בהקדם לתוכנית הרמזור ולניהול שגרת קורונה. המטרה היא להוריד את רמת התחלואה, והמטרה היא בפירוש להציל חיים רבים בישראל. אין לנו את הפריבילגיה לדעת שהיינו יכולים למנוע תמותה נוספת, ולא עשינו זאת. זאת האחריות שלנו. כנציגי ציבור אנחנו חייבים לפעול עכשיו, ואני אומר לכם לפעול יחד למען כל אזרחי ישראל.
A far cry from the internationally praised handling of the coronavirus outbreak in March, Israel is now going from its second general closure to 100% full lockdowns. As of 2 p.m. Friday, September 25, and until the Jewish holidays end October 10, all private businesses and the public sector will be closed, with the exception of essential services such as those in the food and medical industries. Both prayer spaces and demonstrations or protests will also be closed and limited to just 20 people outdoors, socially distanced, and less than 1,000 meters from their homes. The only exceptions to this, as of now, will be for Sunday night and Monday, where synagogues will be allowed to open for limited Yom Kippur services. Meanwhile, educational institutions will be closed. Public transportation will be reduced to the bare minimum. Hospitals have been asked to delay non-essential and elective procedures. Air travel will likely be canceled altogether, and all sports sectors will be shuttered except for official international games. But of course, the jury is still out on whether this is even close to the right move in defeating the COVID pandemic, the public already arguing against it.
I think the government is using and deploying actions that there's no medical agreement that are necessary to combat the new infections, which is in a way kind of upsetting because I'm happy to cooperate with any measures that have a rationale behind it, and I'm not convinced that this specifically does.
I think that the government is completely dysfunctional. I mean, nothing that is related to the country, to the citizens, is in its priority. Nobody is thinking about us. I really feel it right now. I mean, that we are not a factor in anything right now.
And CEO of Hadassah Hospital, Professor Zev Rothstein, even suggests that an inquiry be opened into the government's handling of the crisis when it's over. Well, in fact, the lockdown was passed not by healthcare professionals, but by politicians. The outline for the new restrictions being drafted by the alternate coalition cabinet, led by Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Gantz, and select other ministries. The coronavirus cabinet, however, which is supposedly in charge of leading the fight against the virus, was not involved at all. And those who oppose the recent measures include Ministry of Economy and Industry Amir Peretz, Bank of Israel Governor Amir Yaron, and Minister of Finance Israel Katz, who argues that the private sector was not supposed to close down, and that what's being proposed now is globally unprecedented with severe consequences for the economy, which is already suffering with an 11% unemployment rate. Even coronavirus czar Professor Roni Gamzu rallied against these new 100% public and private sector lockdowns, instead backing a 50% closure. Netanyahu, though, is sticking to his guns.
הדבר הזה גם נדרש לטובת הכלכלה. מי שחושב שאנחנו יכולים לעבוד עם מגפה מתפרצת, עם תמותה ותחלואה עולה, ושהדבר הזה לא ישפיע על הכלכלה, הוא טועה. ואם אנחנו צריכים לפעול ולעשות צעדים קשים, עדיף לעשות את זה בחגים עכשיו, שהכלכלה נמצאת בהילוך נמוך יותר.
The Israeli Ministry of Health is reporting over 6,800 overnight infections as of this morning, bringing the new active total to upwards of 57,000, at least 667 in serious condition, and the death toll now at 1,335. Moving on, tourism in and out of Israel may be grinding to a halt, but elsewhere things are starting to pick back up. Members of European Parliament demanding that something be done to support the 22 million jobs in the industry now at stake. Nittany Manson has the details.
The whole world feeling the hurt. The European Commission is now reporting losses of up to 90% across tourism-related industries, including restaurants, hotels, tour operations, airlines, and long-distance trains. And this making for a total of roughly 2.4 million businesses and nearly 23 million jobs on the chopping block. That's also over 10% of the EU's gross domestic product. The only problem now, though, lies in creating a universal health and hygiene protocol for movement across the European Union. Members of the EU Tourism Task Force issuing a statement on Wednesday, saying that as things are, even when travel is partially possible, the varied and constantly changing rules make it too difficult. There is good news, however. Things are starting to look up across the EU as coronavirus numbers are seemingly slow but steady on the decline in many areas, and opportunities to get the market back on track are starting to reopen. So according to the task force, all that the tourism industry apparently still needs is direct financial support, transparent criteria to access risk, coordinated travel restrictions, and hygiene and health protocols, and continued EU management towards sustainable tourism.
Israeli-Arab Gulf relations are only moving forwards. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Tuesday was speaking with Bahrain's Crown Prince in the first official phone call since the signing of the historic Abraham Accords. It's the first public conversation since signing the landmark Declaration of Peace on the White House lawn. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Bahraini Crown Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa underscoring the importance of securing regional and international peace and stability.
שוחחתי עם יורש העצר של בחריין, הנסיך סלמן בן חמד, שיחה יוצאת מן הכלל, מאוד ידידותית, וחזרנו על העקרונות של הסכמי אברהם, ודיברנו איך אנחנו בעצם יוצקים תוכן מהיר להסכמים בין בחריין וישראל, הופכים את השלום הזה, שלום כלכלי, שלום טכנולוגי, שלום תיירותי, שלום בכל אחד ואחד מהתחומים הללו, ואתם תשמעו על הצעדים המעשיים בקרוב מאוד.
Now, with respect to Israel's other partner in the Abraham Accords, Israel Defense Minister and alternate Prime Minister Benny Gantz is in Arlington, Virginia, welcomed to the Pentagon by United States Secretary of Defense Mark Esper. The pair scheduled to discuss bilateral ties, as well as Israel's continued military superiority in the region. Secretary Esper insisting that Israel will always maintain that edge as a matter of United States policy.
I know we have a lot to cover today, but I do want to say up front for everyone that a cornerstone of our defense relationship is preserving Israel's qualitative military edge in the region. The United States is committed to that, and the Department of Defense is committed to that imperative. And we will continue to support the long-standing U.S. priority to maintain Israel's QME.
The Middle East is an unstable region. I think the only stable place within it is the State of Israel, or one of the most stable places in the Middle East. And as I always say, we have no other United States, nor do you have any other Israel.
Israeli concerns of losing the military edge coming on the heels of growing reports that the United States will sell advanced F-35 warplanes to the United Arab Emirates as a side deal to the Abraham Accords peace agreement. President Trump even recently again indicated that he'd have no problem selling the jets to the Gulf state. Israel has long opposed the sale of F-35s to any U.S. ally in the region, however, including Jordan and Egypt, who also officially recognize Israel. Meanwhile, the Palestinians are taking their protests against the Israel-Arab normalization deals to a new level, cutting off their noses to spite their faces, as the saying goes. Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki now announcing that the Palestinian Authority will renounce its current chairmanship of Arab League meetings.
قررت دولة فلسطين التنازل والتخلي عن حقها في ترأس مجلس الجامعة في دورته الحالية، لأنه لا يشرفها أن تشاهد هرولة العرب نحو التطبيع خلال رئاستها. وكون قرار الهرولة قد اتخذ في واشنطن فليس من المجدي بذل المزيد من الجهد في إقناع أحد بعدم التطبيع خاصة وأنهم ليسوا أصحاب قرار.
Since the announcement of intentions to normalize earlier this summer, the Palestinian Authority has condemned both the United Arab Emirates and now Bahrain for establishing ties with Jerusalem, calling the decision a betrayal of the Palestinian cause and a blow to the two-state solution. Supporters of the Abraham Accords arguing the opposite, though, that negotiations with the Palestinian Authority have been functionally stalled for decades, and that going through other Arab intermediaries first may jumpstart talks. In other news, taking its toll on more than just our sanity, Israel's second coronavirus lockdown is doing unprecedented damage to the economy. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and Finance Minister Israel Katz then are announcing the passing of another stimulus package. In a late-night session on Monday, the Israeli cabinet announced the passing of yet another economic safety net designed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Finance Minister Israel Katz. And the expanded plan, costing an estimated 10.5 billion shekels or $3 billion, will primarily go to help businesses, the self-employed, and wage earners, who are now hurting the most from the current lockdown. In just the 4 days since the second lockdown began, nearly 42,000 Israelis have registered as unemployed and looking for work, the majority of whom have been pushed into unpaid leave. And this bringing the current number of jobless in Israel up to 779,737. Hundreds of businesses and indeed whole industries being shuttered for the coming 3 weeks in efforts to contain the still spreading coronavirus outbreak. But maybe the biggest surprise in the latest economic stimulus comes in the form of a 10% cut to the salaries of Knesset members, ministers, the Prime Minister, and other office holders whose salaries exceed that of an MK by 10%. Prime Minister Netanyahu explaining that, quote, "We all have to stand together and bear the burden." And finally, in addition to unemployment benefits and loans for small to medium businesses, the plan also includes aid to boost the healthcare system and to special needs care.
Well, another country has announced its embassy will move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and by the end of the year. Honduras president writing on Twitter, "We hope to take this historic step before the end of the year as long as the pandemic allows it." Israel currently has no embassy in Honduras, but opened a diplomatic office there last month. This is only the third country to move its embassy to Jerusalem, following the U.S. and Guatemala. Moving on now, 2 Hezbollah operatives have been sentenced today to life in prison for a deadly attack on Israeli tourists. The men were convicted in a Bulgarian court for blowing up a tour bus in 2012 in Burgas, killing 5 Israelis and injuring 35. The ruling leaving families of the victims unsatisfied, as it did not include Hezbollah as a whole in its charges. The 2 men were tried in absentia over the attack, and their whereabouts are not currently known.
По-скоро не, според мен, тъй като реално това е една декларативна присъда, която няма да бъде изпълнена, нито по отношение на наказанието, което е определено, нито по отношение на гражданските искове, които бяха уважени от съда в голям размер.
Meanwhile, the Jerusalem District Court has finally ruled today to extradite suspected sex offender Malka Lerner back to her native Australia, where she is wanted on 74 charges of sexually abusing and raping minors. The case has been overshadowed by alleged political interference, with members of the ultra-Orthodox community in places of power ruling that she is mentally unfit for extradition. Although she can still appeal the decision with the Supreme Court, this is a huge milestone for the fight against sexual violence in Israel.
Still shocked to actually digest what we've just heard. Malka Lerner is going to be extradited to Australia after well over 10 years that she was assisted in escaping Australia by the Adas Israel School, despite all the assistance she's received by the ultra-Orthodox community, or many in the ultra-Orthodox community here in Israel. She's on her way to Australia very shortly.
Today's decision is an important decision for the rule of law, for international cooperation, and most importantly, to the victims of Malka Lerner's crimes. We are very pleased with today's decision, and we look forward to the continued cooperation between Israel and Australia.
Well, a female Jewish icon, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, has died at the age of 87. As Jews in the United States sat down over the weekend to celebrate Rosh Hashanah, news broke that Ginsburg, the first female Jewish member of the Supreme Court, passed away. An irreplaceable champion for women's rights. There is a saying in Judaism that those who die on the Jewish New Year are considered righteous, or tzaddik in Hebrew, and she's definitely in that category. And on another holiday-related note, because I'm sure there haven't been enough of those, according to the Hebrew calendar, Rosh Hashanah brings us into the year 5781. So in honor of the beginning of a new year full of births, deaths, celebrations, and other significant life events, ILTV's Chana Rifkin takes us back on a look at some of the highlights that marked 5780.
Well, it's that time of year again, the Israel Central Bureau of Statistics recently publishing its annual data report. With Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, having just taken place, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, just ahead of us, and not to mention new COVID regulations. But looking back at the year gone by, some interesting trends come into focus. First off, since last Rosh Hashanah, Israel's population increased by 150,000 people, or 1.6%, slightly less impressive than last year's 2.1% growth. Though this number still includes 170,000 live births right here in the Holy Land, 20,000 new immigrants, and 44,000 deaths. The total population then rising now to 9.246 million people. Oddly enough, however, one thing the coronavirus apparently had little to no effect on is health. The CBS reporting 83.9% of Israelis aged 20 and up saying their health is very good, while the average life expectancy, already amongst the world's highest, rose slightly to nearly 85 years for women and 81 for men.
Well, Israelis are making their mark on TV. A show depicting the life of an ultra-Orthodox community in New York took home an Emmy last night for outstanding directing of a limited series, movie, or dramatic special. The Netflix series called Unorthodox stars Israeli actress Shira Haas and was nominated for 6 awards in total. The plot follows young Esty as she grapples with her escape from the tight-knit ultra-Orthodox world of Brooklyn, moves to Berlin, and discovers herself. Mazal tov to Shira.
All right, moving on. Lockdown or no lockdown, Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement, is coming. And normally thousands of Israelis and Jews from around the world arrive at the Holy Temple's Western Wall complex in Jerusalem to write down prayers and personal requests and stuff them into the cracks between the stones. Well, this year you probably won't make it to the wall or even to Jerusalem, but your prayers still might. The Jewish Agency for Israel has now announced a global campaign to gather as many prayers as possible and place them at the wall according to tradition. Jewish Agency emissaries all around the world will be stationed in wait, receiving notes and passing them on. Agency Chair Isaac Herzog saying that as an organization whose mission it is to strengthen global Jewry and its relationship with Israel, we thought it would be fitting to facilitate this important act during the high holiday season. Of course, you can also now submit your prayers digitally and in multiple languages by visiting the link that you see on screen, my.jewishagency.org/kotel. Moving on, there is no better catalyst for innovation than dire necessity, and this latest technology certainly solves a new but major problem. In light of the coronavirus, Israeli-based Touchless AI is now deploying a voice-activated solution that can transform any digital kiosk into a touch-free device. This means that restaurants, airports, medical centers, theme parks, and really any other points of sale can now utilize this hands-free technology and add an additional layer of protection between their clients. The system is already being piloted in the United States and Europe. And so how does it work? Well, Touchless AI shows numbers on a screen that correlate to menu options, and people need only say the number of their selection to make it. Also, the technology is currently already available in English, Japanese, and Hebrew, and it can be modified quickly for all languages. It's also already supported by all web-based platforms and operating systems. And now, speaking of smart solutions, the Tel Aviv Jaffa municipality plans to be the first city to install smart roads which will recharge electric vehicles as they drive. Chana Rifkin with the story.
Say goodbye to gas stations because the future of travel is here. The Tel Aviv Jaffa municipality recently announcing plans to introduce smart roads as part of a pilot project for a more sustainable public transportation system. The project will start with a bus line following an electrically charged route through North Tel Aviv, allowing the bus to recharge its electric battery as it drives. And Tel Aviv, a leading city in innovation, will be the first in the world to install these smart roads throughout its city if the trial is successful, with the municipality also considering options to add other vehicles to the recharging road roster, including trucks and cars. The project's goal is to use the technology, which lays just below the surface of the road, to cut down on air pollution and to provide a more efficient transportation system. And the central Israeli city is set to begin the trial in December 2020. So could dreams of a cleaner and greener city be in the not-so-distant future? We certainly hope so.
And now for some more delicious news. Israeli wineries have a lot to be proud about. Nearly 70 Israeli wines winning top marks in this year's International Decanter Competition. Nittany Manson with the story.
A prestigious annual competition. 116 judges tasting at least 16,518 wines throughout the 2020 Decanter Wine Competition. Each wine then getting a score and a grade from commended to bronze, silver, gold, platinum, and finally best in show. While showing up big time for the Jewish state, 69 Israeli wines received top marks at the month-long judging, with 6 wineries winning gold, up from 3 in 2019. And of the 6 wineries, 4 of them are based in Judea and Samaria. But the winning wines include 2 wines from the Shiloh region and 1 wine each from the Gvaot, Tulip, and Yarden wineries, each winning a score of 95. Meanwhile, the Psagot winery in the Judean hills near Jerusalem came in on top amongst the Israeli winners with a score of 96, earned for its 2016 Peak red wine. As for the best in show, well, France secured the most top prizes with 12 of the competition's top 50 awards. But not to worry, 6 gold medals one year, best in show the next, and congratulations again to all the winners.
And that's it for ILTV's Weekly Review. I'm Aaron Porras. See you next week.